Okay, welcome to the Higher Ground Calvary Chapel School of Ministry. This is our Sunday after service session. We're doing the Kinsman Redeemer, and this is Class 5. I'm going to say Class 5, Take 2. For the home audience, we did film this. We went through it and had some really good discussions. And for some reason, before they took it off the chip and put it on the internet, the chip got recorded over. So we have some wonderful people that are excited to come back and sit down for a second time. Hopefully they won't fall asleep like we do in reruns. And this is the class dealing with the cities of refuge. Now, what I've been doing is I've been using the book, The Kinsman Redeemer, as the template. And we've been trying to put together a class on evangelism. That is something that we felt we needed for the School of Ministry. In the past, we had somebody who was from outside the church. He had come in and he had taught the class on evangelism, and he had a different slant than we have. And he was not happy with how we were doing our slant, so he decided he didn't want to come back, so we needed to put together a new class on evangelism. So, today I'm going to step back from evangelism just for a little, and I want to go back to focus on the role of the Kinsman Redeemer. Now, the Kinsman Redeemer was required to be the closest blood relative for the one needing the services of the Kinsman Redeemer. And I believe that this is an important concept, is that it has to be somebody related by blood. This has to be somebody who cares about the person who's being redeemed. They are going to be getting involved in their life. One of the important things about the Kinsman Redeemer, when you do the study, the Kinsman Redeemer was under no obligation to redeem the relative. They could choose to redeem or not to redeem, whichever way they wanted to go. But if they did redeem the relative, the money came out of their pocket, and there is no provision under the law of Moses to reimburse the Kinsman Redeemer. So this is definitely an act of goodwill and completely of their own free will to do this. So this has to be the closest blood relative. And we've been talking before about how there are three separate functions under the law for the Kinsman Redeemer. Now, first of all, he was to redeem. And we see Jesus fulfilling the role of the Kinsman Redeemer when he was born into the human race. When he got born into the human race, he became related to us by birth. And therefore, he is now a relative, and he has got the legal status to redeem us. Also, because he is now a human and physical, he now has the price of the redemption. He has his own blood that can be shed, and he can die. So on the cross, Jesus fulfilled the role of the Kinsman Redeemer. And one of the things I want to kind of stress right now is that we're in what's called the age of grace, or I would call it the age of redemption. Jesus said in the book of John, chapter 12, that even if somebody does not accept his offer, he will not judge them, because this is the age of grace. And all of this will change when he gets to his next function. His next function is going to be the role of the avenger of blood. The avenger of blood is the one who will come after anybody who killed a blood relative. Now, we're going to be focusing on this function more than any other today, because this function actually will pick up in the tribulation period. And at the rapture, we're going to see the age of grace or the age of redemption come to an end. Now, that does not mean that people will not be getting saved by grace during the tribulation period. We have a group of people that are called the tribulation saints, and they are without number, and these are the people that will be saved after the tribulation begins. But for right now, there is the age of grace. And then after the rapture, the tribulation begins, and in the tribulation, Jesus will be assuming the role of the avenger of blood, and we'll be talking about this in more detail. And then when this world is over and the elements melt with a fervent heat and a very loud noise, as Peter describes it, there's going to be a new heaven and there's going to be a new earth. And the church will be coming down dressed as a bride for her groom. And that is going to be the marriage supper of the Lamb. And at that point, you're going to see the Levirate marriage. And the Levirate marriage comes from the term brother-in-law. And that's the Latin. And the brother-in-law was required that if his brother died without leaving any children for the wife, he was required to go in and marry the widow and raise up a child in the name of his deceased brother. That is going to be the picture in the new heaven and the new earth, the marriage supper of the Lamb. The closing out of the book of Revelation, for example, has the Spirit and the bride. Not the church, it's the bride. So this is before the marriage supper of the Lamb. And the closing comments in the last chapter of Revelation is the Spirit and the bride say, come. That is the invitation to come to the marriage supper of the Lamb. Now, we've explored the law of the kinsman redeemer, and we've explored the law of the Levirate marriage. Again, there's the third function which is assigned to the kinsman redeemer, and we pick this up in Numbers 35, 10 through 28. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you have come over Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall appoint you cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the slayer may flee there, which kills any person at unawares. Now, notice this is for accidental killing. It's not for intentional killing. The law of Moses does not really give us the option of jail or prison. And so when we get to the cities of refuge, you're going to see this is probably the closest example of a prison system that the law of Moses offers. And they shall be unto you cities for refuge, for the avenger, from the avenger, that the manslayer die not until he stands before the congregation in judgment. So if I'm out chopping down a tree and I haven't been paying attention to my hand tool and I don't realize the axe head has become loose, and I swing back, and when I swing back, I hit the wall, the axe head comes off, flies over and hits John in the head and kills him. Now, that was an accident. And I've got one option: run for my life. Because the avenger of blood, it does not matter if the killing was accidental or intentional. It is the duty of the avenger of blood to avenge that death by, i.e., killing me. So I will be running to the closest city of refuge, or if I'm really sneaky, I'll take an alternate route and a roundabout route and go to a city of refuge where the avenger of blood is not thinking about, so I can slip in before he catches me. And the city of refuge will give me refuge up to the point that my case can be heard by the elders that are there in the city of refuge. So that's the stand before the congregation in judgment. And of these cities which you shall give, 6 cities shall you have for refuge. You shall give 3 cities on this side of Jordan, and 3 cities shall be given to you of the land of Canaan, which shall be the cities of refuge. Now what happened, the original plan was for all 12 tribes to be in the promised land. And before they made the decision to basically wimp out and not go into the tribe, into the city or into the land of Canaan and take it, 3 of the tribes, or actually 2.5 tribes, decided, we like this land over here on this side of the Jordan. It's really green, it's really fertile, and we all raise flocks and herds. This is perfect for us. And so there was a really big issue. It's like Moses is going, you guys, you're being stupid about this. You're being unreasonable. Your land is on that side of the Jordan. in the promised land, and they go, can't we cut a deal? And it was kind of the fact that they were allowed to start settling in now on this side of the Jordan and setting up their flocks and their herds and getting their places to live put together before they crossed over. And so for the 40 years that they're technically in the wilderness, this land is still there. So Moses cut a deal and says, okay, if you want to stay here and you want to be on this side of the Jordan, you're going to have to volunteer to be the front guard. And you're going to be the vanguard, and every time we go into battle, you are going to be right out front. And you're going to keep fighting until all of your fellow brothers have earned and won their land. And that was the deal. And they agreed to that. So as a result, I believe the guidelines for the cities of refuge was adjusted because 2.5 tribes are on this side of Jordan and the other tribes are on this side of the Jordan. So here we find in Numbers where Moses is giving the instructions that you're going to have 3 on this side of Jordan and 3 on that side of Jordan. They're going to be cities of refuge. Now these 6 cities shall be a refuge both for the children of Israel and for the stranger and for the sojourner among them, that everyone that kills any person unawares may flee there. Now, this is going to be something we're going to be talking about later. This law applies whether you're Jew or Gentile. So this law technically would apply for Jews and Christians, Jews and the Gentiles of the world or the church. Now, we're going to be seeing the picture of this and what it represents in the New Testament, and then how God is going to be putting this together. So it's not something exclusive just for the Jews. The law of Moses applies equally to somebody who's just wandering through or to a non-Jew that has chosen to live among them. And if he strikes him with an instrument of iron so that he dies, he is a murderer. And the murderer shall surely be put to death. So here Moses is giving the examples of what is killing somebody by accident, and you're a slayer, manslaughter, versus over here where you have killed somebody on purpose and you're a murderer and there is no protection for you in the city of refuge. So if you're using an instrument of iron, you have a hammer, you've got a sword, you've got a steel rod or something like that, and you hit somebody and beat them with it, and they die, you're classified as a murderer. And if he strikes him with throwing a stone wherein he may die, and he dies, he is a murderer, and the murderer shall surely be put to death. So if you're throwing something at somebody intentionally, then if they get hit and if they die, you're going to be classified as a murderer, and the cities of refuge will not apply to you.
So why is it that they don't do for the accidental?
The accidental is the fact that they will track you down and kill you for an accidental death unless you go to the city of refuge.
Yeah, you have to go there, but I mean, it was an accident.
It was an accident, but you still took a life.
Yeah, okay.
It is the concept that the law of Moses says that if there is shedding of blood, that blood must be atoned for in order to keep the land from being polluted. Now, I find this a little bit interesting, and I'll probably get in trouble for mentioning names, but we live right next door to San Bernardino, and San Bernardino is the murder capital of the United States. More people are killed per year in San Bernardino than any other city, including New York and Los Angeles and Chicago. You think with all the crime in those cities, you'd have more murders. No, it's just 20 miles away. You know, how the city...
Maybe now it's different.
Is it a city or county?
It's
County.
a city. It's a county. Okay,
I think
okay,
it's
a county.
county.
Yeah.
But it is like the murder capital of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go over to San Bernardino, and San Bernardino City Council, don't listen to county, don't pay attention, it is a very depressed area. There's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of crime, and there is a lot of, just bad living conditions. over there. And I believe it is directly related that you have killings, and the killings are not atoned for. The blood is shed, and the land is never cleansed, whether it's an intentional or whether it's murder. Now, we're just talking murder. You know, we're not talking about the accidental killings and things like that as well, so I don't know what's happening there. And so the feeling or the concept is that if you kill somebody, you have to atone for the blood. There's an entire sacrifice, and I touched on this briefly in some other class on pictures of Jesus, where it's called the red heifer. And so there's this whole ceremony. Well, let's kind of, it's not the red heifer, but when we talk about Pilate, and when Pilate finally says, okay, fine, take Jesus and crucify him, he knew Jesus was innocent. And he performed a ceremony where he washed his hands in public. And he says, you know, his blood be upon you. Now, in the law of Moses, there is this other procedure. If you find a dead body lying out in the field, well, you got to start measuring to see which city is closest. And so the city that is closest has to have the elders come out and basically perform a sacrifice. I think it's an ox or something like that, and they have to sacrifice this. And basically they're washing their hands and they're saying, God, we don't know who killed this man, but please don't lay that charge to us. And we're going to have this offering to atone for the shed blood and to keep our land pure. And that's where Pilate brought that ceremony of washing his hands when he turned Jesus over to the Romans to be executed. So yeah, death is death, and death requires some type of an atonement, some type of cleansing to keep the land from becoming what Jesus, or what God calls polluted. And now my little thing is not working again. There we go. Okay, so moving on, the revenger, and in the book of Numbers he's called the revenger of blood. In the book of Joshua he is called the avenger of blood. The revenger or avenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. Now that's a little bit different. Under the law of Moses, the proper method of execution was stoning. And the reason they used stone was because the 10 Commandments were written on tablets of stone. And by taking stones and killing somebody with stones was a symbol of the law putting that person to death. But in this case, the avenger of blood is supposed to do the killing personally. And I think we come here, there's going to be a discussion about being a quick thrusting with the sword, so that it's, you know, fast and not long and lingering and things like that. So it's the avenger has to personally be the one to kill the murderer. When he meets him, he shall slay him. So again, that's why I am running for my life. But if he thrust him of hatred, or hurl at him by lying of weight, that he die. In other words, here is another example of where the person is considered a murderer and is not qualified to go to the city of refuge for protection. If he thrusts him out of hatred, you're getting angry, you lose your temper, you're yelling, you're fighting. Or if you're hiding or laying in wait and you jump the person and you end up killing him so he dies, well then in that case, or if it's an enmity, strike him with his hand that he dies. He that struck him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. And again, the revenger of blood shall slay the murderer when he meets him. Now, this is a strange concept, because you stop and think that if I was suddenly contacted that my younger brother had been killed over in Arizona, under this law, I would be required to go to Arizona and hunt down this person that killed my brother and me personally kill him. I don't think I could do that. You know, but back in that day and time, this seemed to be very common for people. They'd been to war, they'd been battling, they had killed people in war, so they were used to killing the enemy. and they also had to butcher their own animals. So, but if he thrusts him suddenly without enmity, or if cast upon anything without lying in wait, in other words, you're tossing your anvil out the window just to get rid of it, roadrunner and coyote situation, and the anvil hits him, or if there's any stone wherein a man may die, seeing him not, and cast it upon him that he died, and was not his enemy, neither was he seeking him harm, then the congregation shall judge between the slayer, and again, notice he's now a slayer, not a murderer. They keep making that distinction here. The slayer and the revenger of blood, according to these judgments. After the congregation shall deliver the slayer out of the hand of the revenger of blood, and the congregation shall restore him to the city of his refuge. So you've got 6 cities to choose from. And I may run across and figure the smartest thing to do is hop the Jordan River and use one of those cities of refuge, because the avenger of blood is thinking I'm probably going to pick one close to where I killed somebody. Well, they find out where I am. They're going to take me out of the city of refuge to have me stand this trial. And the elders of the city will be watching over the trial and rendering the judgment, and I'll be testifying my version of what happens. The avenger of blood will be there testifying his version of what happened. And there's an interesting thing, because under the law of Moses, you cannot be put to death without two agreeing witnesses. They have to collaborate. And so if you can't get 2 people to collaborate, and it's just my word versus their word, then I would not be found guilty. So the avenger of blood would probably be bringing other witnesses that saw what happened to testify to the congregation. And if the elders decide, okay, this was accidental, then at that point they will take me and move me back to the city that I had selected to hide in. And the avenger of blood can't have me. That's how the system is set up. And where he had fled, and he shall abide in it until the death of the high priest, which was anointed with the holy oil. So you don't know how long you're going to be living there, but they're going to take you back to that city of refuge. They're going to give you a place to live in the city of refuge, and you're going to probably be providing for yourself and working and living in there in whatever trade you have. And that's where you're going to live until the high priest dies. And at that point, there's like a reset button on the law of Moses and the law of the avenger of blood. But, here's your exception, if the slayer shall at any time come outside the border of the city of his refuge where he has fled, and the revenger of blood finds him outside the border of the city of his refuge, and the revenger of blood kills the slayer, he shall not be guilty of the blood. Now, I think there was an area outside the city, lands and borders, where they would be allowed to grow crops and to provide for themselves, maybe to raise their cattle or raise their goats or their sheep or something. So you have the city itself with the walls, but then you have a border, the land around there, and it's probably very clearly marked at this point. And there was one situation where somebody went out, and it was kind of sneaky because somebody took his goats and led them out beyond the border. And so he went to go find the goats, and the avenger of blood found him outside of the border and killed him. And again, when that happens, the avenger of blood is not guilty of shedding the blood. If he goes into the city, or if he grabs the guy and drags him outside of the city and kills him, he would be considered a murderer, and then he would be up for running for his life from another avenger of blood. Because he should have remained in the city of his refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer shall return into the land of his possession. So if he was in the tribe of Judah, he would go into the land of Judah where his city was that he was living at before he killed somebody by accident. and it would be all cleared, he would be safe, and he could go back to living his life and living with his family. Now we're going to shift over to Joshua's account. The Lord spoke unto Joshua, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Appoint out for you cities of refuge, wherever I spoke unto you by the hand of Moses. So he's repeating this now to Joshua after he had given it to Moses. That the slayer who kills any person unawares and unwittingly may flee there, and they shall be your refuge from the avenger of blood. Here they actually use the title, the avenger of blood. And when he does flee unto one of these cities, shall stand at the entering of the gate of the city, and shall declare his cause in the ears of the elders of that city. So I go running up and I start beating on the gate or beating on the door or ringing a bell or whatever they have there, and that'll have the elders come out to hear my case. Hey, I was chopping down a tree, my axe head came off, it flew across behind me and hit, my friend and killed him. I didn't mean to do this, I'm innocent, it's an accident. And they will then bring me into the city until a more formal declaration is needed. And they shall take him into the city unto them, and give him a place that he may dwell among them. And if the avenger of blood pursue after him, see, in some cases it may be obvious, and they may figure, well, the guy didn't mean to do this, I feel sorry for him, but somehow you have to atone for the blood. And so he's atoning for the blood by living in the city of refuge. It's his atonement. Then they shall not deliver the slayer up into his hands, because he struck his neighbor unwittingly and hated him not before time. And he shall dwell in that city until they stand before the congregation of judgment, and until the death of the high priest that shall be in those days. Notice we keep coming back to the high priest. And then shall the slayer return and come into his own city, and unto his own house, unto the city from which he had fled. And they shall appoint Kadesh in Galilee, and Mount Naphtali, and Shechem, and Mount Ephraim, and Kirjath Harbah, which is in Hebron, in the mountain of Judah. So those are three of these cities. And on the other side of Jordan, on Jericho eastward, they assigned Bezer, or they call it Bozor in the scriptures, in the wilderness upon the plain out of the tribe of Reuben. And Ramoth in Gilead out of the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan out of the tribe of Manasseh. So we have Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh are the 2.5 tribes that are living on this side of the Jordan, outside of the promised land. Now, Bashan right now is technically where the area of Jordan, the country of Jordan, is currently located. These were the cities appointed for all the children of Israel, and for the stranger that lives among them, that whosoever kills any person unawares might flee there and die not by the hand of the avenger of blood, until he stood before the congregation. So when Joshua completed the conquest of Canaan, he appointed 3 cities of refuge on the east side of Jordan, and they were Golan, Ramoth, and Bezer or Bozor. And they completed the conquest. He appointed 3 cities on the west side of the Jordan: Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron. So here's a little map, so you get a visual. Try to give you some visual aids. This is the land of Israel, and you have the Jordan River. And the Jordan River is coming from the north through the Sea of Galilee and coming all the way down to the Dead Sea. And so on this side is where Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh were living, the fertile lands. It's a pretty big area. And you got Reuben here in the south, and they assigned the city of Bezer. A little bit further north you have the Ramoth, and that is the area, can't read my glares on the screen. Reuben, Gad, so that's probably closer to Gad, and then Manasseh in the north is Golan. We have the Golan Heights, and they're the northern part of Israel. We were actually there both in 1978 and back in 2006. In fact, the Golan Heights are now, were at that time one of the strongest military installations ever built, and it was owned by Syria. And they were using that to fire missiles and stuff down into Israel for a number of years. In the 60s, I think it was the 1970. I'm doing terrible with my time. In the second war that they had, they actually had the instructions to take the Golan Heights back. And so they went there and they took the Golan Heights. But that is the northern part of Israel. It's all fertile land up there except for the hills and the heights. And over here on this side of the Jordan, we have Kadesh, and you might recognize by the Kadesh Barnea, which is used a lot of times in the Bible. And then you have the Shechem, and then Hebron is down here in Jordan area. And this is all Simeon and Jordan and Benjamin all have this lower area. So you had things very nicely spread out for you, a place to go and to get your protection if you needed it. Any questions on this part? Okay. So as I said, this is the closest thing that Israel has to a jail system. The law always required one of two things. One is you had to pay restitution for damages. If you stole something, if you broke something, or somehow you caused a loss to your neighbor or somebody else's property or possessions, you had to pay restitution. Now, out of this concept is where our laws on liability insurance comes. That if you are responsible for somebody's property, or if your actions damage somebody's property or possession, then you have to, make restitution. And that's why you have your liability insurance to pay so that you don't have to. Or if you killed somebody or did something serious, you had death by stoning. And this idea of the city of refuge for an accidental death was the only exception to these two ways that you were punished. Now, this only applies to accidental killings. In other words, we're talking manslaughter and not murder. And again, they kept referring to the person as the slayer and not the murderer. And the killer has 6 cities to choose from. 3 on one side of Jordan and 3 on the other side of Jordan. Now, these cities were given to the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi was not given any territory in the promised land. They were God's possession. God owned them, and this is why they were not given their own piece of property or territory. And this is why it was so important for the rest of the tribes to give their tithes and their offerings and their sacrifices, because this is how the tribe of Levi was supported. They didn't have this area to raise all these herds and cattle and sheep and oxen. They didn't have areas where they could plant all these crops and have food that they could harvest. They were totally, completely dependent upon the offerings and the tithes and the sacrifices that the other tribes brought. Now, this is why we see the situation at the return from the Babylonian captivity. They came back under the return of Zerubbabel to build the temple. And they got the foundation laid and kind of got things started, and then everybody took off, and they went off to take care of their own property and to plant their new crops and to build the new houses and to get their cattle running. And they were not giving tithes and offerings because the temple was not up and running. And so the Levites had to leave their service to God. They had to abandon the temple, and they went off and tried to find some land that they could own, that they could work to basically provide for their families. So the cities of refuge was the only actual physical property that was given to them. So this section on the cities of refuge appears to be the only section that mentions the revenger of blood or the avenger of blood.
That was Levi.
The tribe of Levi's have it, yeah.
Okay.
Now, if somebody actually kills the kinsman redeemer's relative, the avenger of blood is assigned to the task of tracking them down and killing them. Notice they have the word thrusting through. It's supposed to be a quick and merciful death, not a slow and lingering death. The avenger of blood status falls to the kinsman redeemer, and the connection comes from the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance and one of its definitions of a Hebrew word. The definition connects the avenger of blood with the kinsman redeemer. And for a number of years, I never realized the kinsman redeemer would also be the avenger of blood. And I think it was Dr. Chuck Missler that first mentioned that to me. And I started doing my research, and it is frustrating because there is nothing specifically in the Bible with its scriptures that says, oh, by the way, the kinsman redeemer is going to be your avenger of blood. And it's only when you go into the Strong's Exhaustive and you're looking at the different words for the kinsman redeemer that they actually say that this is the same word to refer to the avenger of blood. It's a grammatical study that makes the connection. Now, the cities of refuge are another similitude. The idea is that a similitude is this is similar to that. And by my teaching you about this symbol over here, you better understand the real thing over here. So, we do not realize until Jesus shares the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Now, some Bible scholars believe that this is an actual event and not a parable. A lot of people say, oh, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Well, take a look at your scripture, because you're going to find out that parables do not give the names of the characters, and Jesus does specifically name Lazarus. And second, Jesus does not use the word parable to describe this account. Now, it is the story of the rich man and Lazarus that were introduced to a place in the afterlife called the bosom of Abraham. Boom. There you have it. Now, notice down here, these are flames. And this is hell. Now, Sheol is like an umbrella, and it covers the afterlife for humans. And so you have two places that are available. You have hell, or Gehenna, and this is the place of torment, and they're in flames. And this is where they are being held until the great white throne judgment. And then at that time, you have what's called the bosom of Abraham. And this is where believers, Jews and Gentiles, would go waiting for Jesus to come and to die for our sins. So, the Old Testament speaks of death as the grave, the pit, hell, Sheol, and then Jesus refers to it as Gehenna. And Gehenna was actually this part of the Kidron Valley between Mount of Olives and the city, and it's not that big of a place. Anybody planning on going to Israel with us in 2004? Okay. We'll save you a place. When you get there, it blew me away. The first time we went, we were up on the Mount of Olives. And back in 78, they did not have all this fancy stuff done, and so there was a dirt road. And you're walking down the dirt road, and the dirt road is here as you're walking, and the rest of the mountain is up here. I mean, the path had been worn that deep over centuries of being traveled that way. And you come down to the bottom, and they take you into the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus went to pray and where he was arrested. And as you're coming into the Garden of Gethsemane, you're walking down the sidewalk. There's a traffic light right here. And here's the gate for the Garden of Gethsemane. And if you turn around, there's a 2-lane street, a sidewalk, about 15, 20 feet of incline, and there is the wall of the city. That's how close the Mount of Olives is to, the city of Jerusalem. And Gehenna was in the other area, and this was the major garbage dump. And they would burn everything there because one of the kings, that was where they used to do child sacrifices. And they would take the children and they would put them in the arms of these statues that had been heated white hot. And they would drop the baby in there and let it burn to death and scream as part of the sacrifice. And so the king decided, that's it, we're not going to do this. And so he started dumping all of the trash and all the debris into that area where they used to sacrifice, and it was always burning. They were burning trash nonstop. And when I was in Israel back in 2006, we're taking the bus ride, and as we're going around this one corner, there's a sign saying, "This is Gehenna." So I've been to Gehenna. And now it's a big, beautiful, green, fertile park in the, right in the city there. It's like, wow. Things that you look at and say, I read that in the Bible. It doesn't look that way now. So basically, this is where you're going to go when you die. Now, there is no reference to the bosom of Abraham anywhere in the Old Testament. So the question comes up, how did Jesus know about this bosom of Abraham? The only way he could know is because he was God, and he had existed in heaven before he was born on earth. So he was aware of the heavenly things and the spiritual things. So all of this was basically viewed at one place until Jesus came along and relates his story. So here's our story, Luke 16:19. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. He was wealthy and he had a very good life. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus. Now, they keep insisting this is not the Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead. I just find it interesting that this is Lazarus, and in the tale he's asking to send Lazarus back from the dead. And Lazarus, the friend of Jesus, did come back from the dead. But, don't be confused. This is not the same person. A beggar named Lazarus, who was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. Now, I don't want to gross you out. We don't have any food in here today, so this may be a safe time to talk about it. The idea of being fed by the crumbs is literally talking about the fact that they did not have washcloths and things like that for cleaning their hands. So what they would do is they had lots of bread, and after you would finish eating like a big rib or something and your hands were all greasy and stuff, you would take the loaf of bread and rip it open and take the dough, the fresh bread inside, and you would use that to wipe your mouth, and you would wipe your hands with it. Then you basically throw it out. And that's what they're talking about with getting the crumbs from the rich man's table. So that's what he was living off of. And again, the dogs came and took care of him, licking the sores. That's a way of ministering and trying to keep the wounds clean and everything. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. Again, the first reference to this. And the rich man also died, and he was buried. Wow, that sounds like a letdown. So here we have this picture that somebody painted. And down here is the rich man in the flames, in the torment. While up above you have Abraham, and that is Lazarus with him. That's the picture that Jesus is describing. And in hell, the rich man lifts up his eyes, being in torments. And he saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. So again, here's the rich man in the flames, in torment. And the rich man cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. He did not ask for a glass of water. He didn't say, pour this water on me. He was so hot and so intense that any of the water would have just evaporated. So all he was begging for at this point was just a drop of water. That would ease his torment. It would not stop them, but it would ease the torment. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you in your lifetime received good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. Now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they who would pass from here to you cannot. So the idea is that you have all these people up in the bosom of Abraham that are good people, kind, and they'd be up there and they see these people over here in the torment and the flames, and they would want to come and help them. So God put a gulf that could not be passed. So no matter how much you wanted to help somebody down here, you could not. So that they wouldn't pass from here to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from there. And so here's another artist's conception. Over here we see the torments, and over here we see the bosom of Abraham. Nice, lush, green, fertile. And he said, I pray you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, that Lazarus raised from the dead. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, saying, hey, this is real, get serious about it, lest they also come into this place of torment. Abraham said unto him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And of course the rich man comes back and he says, nay, Father Abraham, but if one went to them from the dead, they will repent. So Abraham then responds, and he says unto him, Abraham talking to the rich man, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. And that's going to be referencing Jesus. Jesus will come from the dead, and people still will not believe. That's the slide I had extra. All right. You're not supposed to fix this for some reason. Jesus knew what took place after death. After all, he is God. He existed in the spirit realm before his death. And he knew about the bosom of Abraham. Now, there are 2 places for the dead after death. There is hell for those who do not have faith that God would send the Messiah. And then there was the bosom of Abraham for those who did. We learn that there was a great chasm between these 2 places. It was there to prevent anyone from crossing over from one place to the other. Both places were holding cells or waiting rooms. Those in hell are waiting for the final judgment. That's the great white throne judgment after the world has ceased. It's at the end of time. And then you have the bosom of Abraham was a waiting room for believers. They were prisoners there because they could not get out, but they were waiting for the Messiah to come and to resolve the issue of sin between them and God. They could not enter heaven because there was still sin on them. Up to this point, the law of Moses, the best they could do was cover the sin, but the sin was still there. And God could not abide sin in his presence. So they had to wait until the Messiah and until the kinsman redeemer died to remove the sins. So again, the sacrifices could only cover, they could not remove it. And the closest reference we have to the bosom of Abraham is from the Old Testament, Psalm 68:18. You have ascended on high, and you have led captivity captive. Again, they were captive in the bosom of Abraham. They were not free to come and go or to leave because there was sin in their life. They needed safe passage. And Paul quotes this verse when speaking of Jesus in the grave, Ephesians 4:8. Wherefore he said, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. This is referring to Jesus entering the bosom of Abraham when he died on the cross. He presents himself to those in the bosom of Abraham as the Messiah that they've been waiting for. Sin is now being resolved, so when they died, they could not enter heaven. They were waiting for sin to be resolved. God had promised, but again, the sacrifice had not yet been offered until Jesus died on the cross. The sacrifice offered by the priesthood covered the sin, but again, it could not remove it. Therefore, their sins were still separating them from God. So Jesus describes this wonderful place that was like heaven. Here believers received the good things. It was part of the afterlife. and it was outside of our space-time continuum. Those who rejected God's promise were in the place of torment. This is where the rich man in the story ended up, and Lazarus ended up in the place of blessings. Once Jesus died for sin, and his sacrifice had been accepted by God, all sin was not just covered, it was finally and permanently and forever removed. So they could now enter heaven. So Jesus went into the bosom of Abraham. This is where all the pre-crucifixion believers had been held captive by their sins. He revealed himself to them. He presented himself as the Messiah. And then he opened up the bosom of Abraham and led them out of the temporary dwelling place. Let me kind of toss a question out. Anybody see a detail regarding the cities of refuge that we haven't mentioned yet regarding the bosom of Abraham?
Say that again.
Does anybody notice a detail relating to the cities of refuge that has not yet been mentioned regarding the bosom of Abraham?
In the bosom of Abraham, they were waiting for the high priest to die.
Right. They could not leave until the death of the high priest. Now, in this case, Jesus comes in to heaven, takes them into heaven. And so, again, the question is, why did it take that long to do that? Okay, I'm sidetracked again. I'll come back to my original point. You have to have the death of the high priest. Now, Jesus was the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. He could not be the high priest under the tribe of Levi. He was not a descendant of Aaron. So under the law of Moses, he was barred from being a priest, let alone the high priest. And so Psalms 110 verse 4 says that God has declared and he will not repent. And he's not going to change his mind that Jesus is going to be the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. There's only one priest in the Melchizedek priesthood, so he would be the high priest. And so it's interesting, when Jesus came into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he was declaring himself to be the Messiah. And the Jews, the religion of the Jews, had one task that was assigned to them. They were to recognize and identify the Messiah when he came and introduce the Messiah to the world. And so when Jesus came on the triumphant entry, riding the donkey the way Zechariah 9:9 described it, and on the 880 days after the decree was signed to go back and rebuild the walls like Daniel describes, the priests knew exactly what he was doing. The population knew what he was doing, and they were singing Psalm 118, a messianic psalm, Hosanna, save now. Come and save us. You're the Messiah. And what did the priests do? They shut it down. Jesus, shut it down. Make them be quiet. You're going to cause a commotion. And so with that statement, they rejected his claim to be Messiah without ever putting him to the test. The next day, Jesus is coming back into Jerusalem with his disciples. And people don't understand what's going on. It makes no sense unless you understand the fig tree is a symbol of religion. When Adam and Eve ate the fruit in the garden, they went to the fig tree. They took the leaves and they made aprons or clothing of fig leaves to cover their nakedness. And the nakedness was a picture of their sin. Once they had sinned, their eyes were open and they realized that they were naked. So the fig tree is a symbol of religion. And in this particular case, it is the religion of Israel. Jesus comes back the next day, and as he's walking along, it says, he's hungry. And he goes to this fig tree, minding its own business and just growing off on the side of the road. Well, Mark notes it is not the season for figs. So Jesus knew going up to that tree there would not be a fig on it. And he does this elaborate search and pulling back the branches and looking under the leaves and searches everywhere, and oh, there's no figs. And so he curses the fig tree because he was cursing the religion of Israel. Now, he could not directly curse the religion of Israel because then you can't redeem it. Just as Adam was cursed, but God chose to curse the ground for Adam's sake so that Adam could be redeemed. And he says, let no fruit grow on you. You failed to produce the fruit of identifying me as the Messiah when I came. So let no fruit grow on you from henceforth. Well, interesting thing, with that declaration, Jesus shut down the Levitical priesthood. He shut down the line of Aaron as priests for the Most High God. And he transferred that priesthood of Melchizedek to him. And he became the priest that would offer the sacrifice that week. Now we see later that Jesus is talking about the parable of the fig tree. And if you pay attention to the parable of the fig tree is beginning to put forth its leaves. Now, Chuck Smith made a mistake. I know it's going to be blasphemy for many people. And I was, the first time I said that, I almost got stoned because everybody in the office was a Calvary Chapelite and just, oh, Chuck Smith is fantastic. Yes, he is. He is a wonderful man of God, and I do not mean him any disrespect. But what he did is he claimed that the fig tree was Israel. And so when Jesus says, behold, the parable of the fig tree, when it puts forth its leaves, the generation that sees this happening is going to be the generations that's going to see the rapture and the tribulation and all these things come to pass. So Chuck Smith indirectly was trying to set a date for the rapture. And Israel was restored in 1948, and a generation is 40 years. And so they had all kinds of things. And if you go online, you actually find people that will accuse Chuck Smith of being a false prophet. He was not prophesying. He was seeking to interpret a Bible passage. That's different. And he misinterpreted this Bible passage because he did not understand the fig tree is not Israel. It is the religion of Israel. And right now we are seeing the religion of Israel putting forth its leaves. We have they replaced the menorah. In fact, when we were in 2006, we were at the Temple Mount Institute in Jerusalem, and they had the pieces of the menorah there. And they gave me a piece to hold. I've actually touched the menorah. I don't know, my fingerprints are still on it. They probably cleaned it after I got done holding it, but I was holding this piece and I was like, man, that is heavy. It's pure gold. And they assembled it and they moved it into the western wall area, and it's enclosed there with lights on display 24 hours. That's putting forth its leaves. They replaced the table of showbread. They replaced the altar of incense. They have done genetic research and found a DNA marker for Levi. And so they're identifying those of the tribe of Levi, and they are teaching them the law of Moses and how to perform these sacrifices. They are restoring the priestly garments. Now, interestingly enough, the crimson worm, or the bloodworm as it's called, was extinct. And the bloodworm is interesting. It comes from Psalm 22. Now, Psalm 22 is a picture of Jesus. They pierced my hands and feet. They cast dice for my garments. Well, in there is a line that says, I am a worm and not a man. Well, in the Hebrew, that word is the bloodworm or the crimson worm. This worm will attach itself to wood, either a tree or to a fence post, and it will die as it is giving birth to its children. And it will dye them red, and they will literally be coming out of the body of the bloodworm, and it takes 3 days for the bloodworm to die.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, they were extinct. And guess what? They're back. And the important thing about that is where they get the red crimson dye for the priestly garments. And then they have this whole thing where they could not figure out how to make the blue dye for the priestly garments. Well, they had a bunch of snails they had been experimenting on and working with, and one time they had this long weekend at the lab. So everybody went home and took an extra day, and nobody thought to feed the snails. They come back and these snails have bored holes in the other snails and attached something. And there's like this gland that all the other snails were attacking. And they pulled those glands out, there was something liquid in them, and they put it in a container and they put it out in the sun, and it became the blue dye for the priestly garments. They needed the red heifer in order to do the sacrifice of the red heifer, use the ashes of the red heifer, mix it with water so you could sanctify the temple and all the things in the temple. And there were no red heifers. Well, back in the late 1970s, a farmer in America, his cow gave birth to a red heifer. And the Jews went ballistic. They came over, they bought the heifer, they were expecting it, and unfortunately they found 3 white hairs on the red heifer. And that disqualified it. It has to be without spot and without blemish. So they tried to transport it back to Israel and found out, oh no, customs won't let you export the red heifer. And so while they're over here figuring out, what are we going to do? Red heifers began to be born in Israel. And I was there in 2006, and Amir Safari, who's now the famous Bible teacher online, he was our tour guide. He was a humble guy back then. And we were on the bus, I says, Amir, do you have the red heifer? And he just smiled. He says, actually, there is not a rabbi anywhere that would certify a red heifer for sacrifice because we'd have to go to war for the Temple Mount. So you've got the red heifer, you've got the blue dye, you've got the red dye, you've got the marker in the DNA for the tribe of Levi, you've got the table of showbread, the altar of incense, you've got the menorah, they've done the bronze laver. I haven't heard of them redoing the altar, the bronze altar for sacrifice, and they're not saying anything about the Ark of the Covenant or the mercy seat. And now it is believed to be in Ethiopia. They claim that's the real deal. But there was also, when they were doing excavation behind the Western Wall, they went under the Temple Mount. And when they broke through this one archway, the rabbi of the Temple Mount found objects the size and shape of the Ark of the Covenant, covered in animal skins, and it was decaying. When he came out, according to Amir, he could not speak. And it took him several days to get his voice back, just like Zechariah meeting the angel Gabriel for John the Baptist's birth. He wouldn't shut up. He was telling everybody. And apparently their excavations triggered a whole thing up here on the top of the mount with the Dome of the Rock. And so the Arabs went after it. And it's actually in the internet. It's called the Temple Tunnel Wars. They don't mention the Ark. I suspect the Ark got taken out before all this happened and is somewhere safe for them because they're not planning on restoring it. So the fig tree has put forth its leaves. We are that generation. Or is that our children's generation? I think it's more us because it all started back in the 70s and we were just becoming adults back in the 70s. I still haven't grown up, but I'm legally of age now. So, question is, why did it take so long for Jesus to be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth? And the thing is, he was doing this to fulfill the sign. They were asking for the sign, and he says, no sign shall be given except the sign of Jonah. And as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. And that is the center of the earth. We keep being told about the fact that they're being cast into the bottomless pit. Well, the bottomless pit would be the center of the earth where every direction is up. And you can't get out, and there's really no bottom to it. Again, that seems to be the physical location, but this is something that appears to be in the spirit realm. Keep in mind that during those 3 days, Jesus was outside of time, he was outside of space. And Chuck Missler has an interesting hypothesis that during this time Jesus was offering his blood as sacrifice to God. And he says, how long does it take to atone for all the sin and all the lives throughout all of time? And he was suggesting that that's why the 3 days were there, even though Jesus was outside of time and space. That's what he was doing. Now, the city of refuge is a similitude of this. So these are the cities for those who are guilty. They're all under the sentence of death. And if they leave and the avenger of blood finds them, they die. Notice this city of refuge is available to more than just the Jews. It applies to those Gentiles dwelling among them. And that would be the Gentiles who also believe that God would save them, i.e., the church, if it had been, before the resurrection. So Gentiles trusting in God for salvation at their death went to the bosom of Abraham. Gentiles living in Israel could flee to the city of refuge and have the same protection. The city of refuge was designed for those found guilty of killing. They had to be removed from the land so that the land would not be polluted. Therefore, they lived in the cities of refuge. Now, they would spend the rest of their lives there, and they could not leave. They were now captive in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. So those in the bosom of Abraham stayed in the bosom of Abraham until the death of our high priest, and that would be Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He was the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. He died and went into the bosom of Abraham and cleaned it out, and the bosom of Abraham is now empty. It does not serve any more purpose. It is no longer in use. Its purpose has been fulfilled because all sins have been atoned for. And when believers die since the crucifixion, they get to go directly to heaven. Now, for those in the city of refuge, with the death of the high priest, they were no longer under the sentence of death. They were now free to return to their loved ones. We can now return to our loved ones when we die. We'll all be together in heaven. So it was a city of refuge that was introduced to the role of the third role of the kinsman redeemer, that of the avenger of blood. So when does Jesus assume the role of avenger of blood? Again, right now we're in the age of grace. Jesus is not judging us. He redeems. He makes salvation available to all. But when the church is removed from the world at the rapture, the age of grace will end. And then Jesus will assume the role and become the avenger of blood. And this would be his role during the tribulation. And I have a theory, for lack of a better way to describe it. I won't know till we all get there. We have Revelation chapter 4. John hears a voice crying out, says, "Come up here." And it's described as sounding like a trumpet. At that point, the point of view shifts from being on earth, and now for the rest of Revelation, John is in heaven, not on earth, and he is looking down from heaven throughout the tribulation. In chapter 5, we see God is holding a book or a scroll. It is written within and without. Now, what that means, it is so full, there's no room left for it. Whoever was filling out the book or the scroll, they wrote all over the pages, all over the inside of the scroll, and they ran out of room. There was that much information. And so they had to write on the outside of the scroll. So it's like inside and outside you have double the space to write everything that needs to be written down. So it's written within and without, and it is sealed with 7 seals. This is a picture of this. Now, this is probably, let me make sure I'm looking at the right picture. Yeah. This is not exactly a correct picture. Because notice you have to break all 7 seals in order to open it. But this is just the idea that you can see that there are 7 seals. I got a better picture a little bit later. Now they keep telling us that this is the title deed to the earth. Hal Lindsey began teaching that. Lots of teachers have taught that. Chuck Missler has taught that. Our former pastor, Pastor Harold, taught that. And I'm going to say no. I'm going to challenge this. Because Satan never had the title deed to the earth. Here's where, if you own the title deed, you own the property. And just like I own a copyright to my books that I've written, if I have the copyright to my book, I can do whatever I want to do to my book. I can decide, I really don't like this book, and I pull it off the market, and I basically cancel all the contracts, and I take the original manuscript and I shred them and burn them, and then I go to my computer and hit all the delete buttons, and I delete the entire book so it no longer exists. And there'd be people that would say, I like that book. I'm hoping somebody thinks that. And somebody would go to the court and try to, file a lawsuit and say, Your Honor, don't let him do this. Do an injunction. Stop him from destroying the book. And the judge would have his trial, and he'd say, well, Dennis owns the copyright. The book is his property to do with as he feels. If he wants to destroy it, he can destroy it, and we can't stop him. The same would have been true for Satan if he owned the title deed to the earth. If he owned the title deed to the earth, he would have destroyed the entire world. He'd kill people before they could have a chance to accept Jesus.
But why did Jesus have to go and take the keys from him?
Does it say he took the keys from him?
Jesus took the keys when he was down in
Okay,
Joe.
you're reading into there.
Oh,
He gave Peter the keys. It says, Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell. And that's where the Catholic Church says, oh, Peter got the keys. He was given the keys to the church, not to Peter. And that was before the crucifixion. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in
he
heaven.
came and he took the keys from Satan.
Okay, you want to show me the Bible passage where it says that?
Well, I'll have to pick it up.
Yeah, because that's what people teach, but I don't
Death
think...
and hell and the grave. You took the death, hell, and the grave. You took the keys from Satan.
Okay, I think you're...
Supposed, I mean,
Well, I think what you're doing is you're reading...
I can do it afterward.
Yeah, I know. We get done. But I think that you're taking an image and taking it one step further than it was.
Okay.
Now, Satan did have the power of the earth, because we have where Jesus was being tempted, and Satan says, all these things I will give you if you will worship me. And Jesus did not challenge that Satan had the power of the empires. But that's not the same thing as the title deed to the earth. He had set these empires up. He had built these empires. He had given them the power to conquer. And so he could give Jesus the empires. But this was not the title deed to the earth. I believe that this is actually a record of all the atrocities ever performed on God's people. Everything through the Holocaust, everything from the Christian persecutions of Rome, all the people that were killed back in the Old Testament when they came in and were destroying the cities. And this is why the record is now full. It's been written within and without. And there are 7 seals because 7 is the number of completement. And the record now, with the rapture of the church, God's people have been removed. And God is going to be doing special protection on the remnant of the Jews in Israel during the tribulation. So the record is full, and God is not going to be adding anything else to it because it's now complete. And I think this is the better picture. Notice you break the first seal on this end, you can roll that part and the stuff written on there. Then when you get that one done, you break the next seal, and you unroll that portion, and you break that seal and unroll it, and that seal and unroll it, and this seal, till you get to the last one, and that's the 7th seal, and that's the one that you break. So this is why it's been kept until after the church has been removed. This is why God is offering it now. And notice in the Revelation, no one is worthy to take the scroll from God's hand. So there is no one who qualifies as the avenger of blood. John is weeping in heaven until the angel says, hold it, there is one who is worthy. And he looks over, and they say it's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But John, because he has to put all this in symbol for the Romans not to pick up what he's talking about, John says he sees a lamb that was slain. So again, that would be Jesus. Jesus is worthy to receive the scroll. Well, what does that mean? As the kinsman redeemer, it now falls to him to assume the role of the avenger of blood. And by accepting the scroll, he shifts from the kinsman redeemer to the avenger of blood, and he will now avenge every atrocity against the Jews and the church. And so here it is being handed over. And again, this person had the right idea, because you have different levels and layers of the scroll, so you can break one seal and open it and read it without breaking the other seal and reading it. At this point, Jesus steps back from his role as kinsman redeemer. Again, people can still be saved by grace, and he still now assumes the role of the avenger of blood. The tribulation is God pouring out his wrath upon the world for what it has done to his children. Jesus breaks each seal, and judgment is poured out on the world, not the people. At the end of this tribulation, Jesus returns to the earth to claim it and to sit on his throne in heaven, and he will sit there for 1,000 years. He then shifts to the final role of the kinsman redeemer. He fulfills the law of the Levirate marriage. And who is the widow? Why are there no children? Israel, or Naomi, was married to the law. And the law cannot produce life, it can only produce death. So Jesus marries the church, which is Ruth, and we live happily ever after, forever. Now let me come back to your comment. Jesus does defeat death and hell. Genesis 3:15 talks about the fact that the seed of the woman, which is Jesus, will bruise the head of the seed of the serpent. For that day the serpent had given birth to death and to sin. Jesus on the cross delivered the wound, but I just want to point out that death and hell are not yet dead. We can avoid them and their power over us by accepting Jesus. But the world that rejects Jesus is still subject to death and hell. So up until the time when the world comes to its end and the elements melt with the fervent heat and the loud noise, death and hell are not completely, totally defeated. With the ending of our world and this time and space continuum coming to its end, death and hell are completely and totally defeated and have no more power after that point. There's a lot of discussion about the idea of Jesus, and I think a lot of it comes from what the Catholics are teaching, and they take a scripture and they inadvertently add to it, that Jesus has the power. He does not specifically take the keys. The only keys we hear a reference to is when he's given the keys to Peter. And that's the ability to open or to loose whatever is happening. Whatever he looses here on earth will be loosed in heaven. Whatever he locks here on earth will be locked in heaven. But we'll take a look at that, and we can come back and discuss that later. Let me just point out a thing that I thought is really important. I don't know if we discussed it in this class or another class, but it's an important topic, so I want to make sure we do talk about it. When everything comes to an end, and we have this idea that the laws of physics demand that if you take two positive ends of the magnet and push them together, they won't connect, because positive repels positive. And if you have a positive and a negative, and you're trying to get them apart. At the atom, you have positive, 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 positive protons, and they go, and they lock together. You have a negative electron spinning around, and they don't get pulled in. The Bible tells us that by his hand, all things are held together. And we talked in our class tonight that scientists call this nuclear force. All they did was took God and renamed him. And it says that by his hand, all things are held together. And so when Satan is released at the end of 1,000 years, and he brings the massive rebellion to physically remove Jesus from the throne of Jerusalem, and they're surrounding the city they're screaming and yelling and raising their weapons and getting all crazy, and all of a sudden, the weapon's not there, the feet aren't there, the legs aren't there, the body's not there, the hand's not there, the mouth's not there, the sound's not there, because God goes, and He lets go. The ultimate dead man switch. When He lets go, every particle of matter throughout the entire universe is going to explode as a nuclear explosion. Elements will melt with a fervent heat, and the element is as small as they had back at Peter's time, and with a loud noise. I had a friend who was actually on one of the naval carriers when they were doing the atomic testing over in the atoll, and he says, you have no idea how loud that thing is when it goes off. So when that happens, we have the bema seat of Christ and the great white throne judgment. Those who are in death or in torment, where the rich man is, are coming out. Those that are in the sea, those that are in the abyss, are coming out, and they're going to stand before the great white throne judgment. And at the great white throne judgment, God is going to have the law before Him, and He's going to judge each one based upon the law. Now, we're lucky. We're over here at the bema seat of Christ. The law is not at the bema seat of Christ. Here, our works are being judged, but we ourselves are not being judged. And our works are being judged, and rewards are given accordingly. And it is possible to have done no works, but you're still at the bema seat, and you're still going to heaven. You just won't have any rewards when you get in there. You shall be saved as by fire. They shall suffer loss, but they shall not be lost. So that's the thing that finally made me realize that over here is the law, and over here is the bema seat. We never come before the great white throne. We never are judged by the law as a believer. Jesus was over here being judged on our behalf. We never made it here. We're over here.
So as I had spoken to you prior, that judgment, the great white throne judgment, so it's not that they're being judged as if they have a chance of being in heaven.
But being fair, He has to give them the opportunity.
Okay.
And it says that the books are open. Now, we find that there are things called the books of remembrance, there are the books of work, and there is the book of life. And John also notes that there is the Lamb's book of life, as if this is separate. And the concept with the book of life is that at some point you can be blotted out. Now, the Jews had the idea that if you didn't keep the law of Moses this year, you'd be blotted out. And when they had Yom Kippur, they were celebrating that they had not been blotted out. But I believe that everybody who was ever born has been written in the book of life. And if you die without Jesus, then is when your name is blotted out. But the Lamb's book of life, no one is blotted out of there. And this is kind of the concept of once saved, always saved, because I see your salvation as your spiritual birth. And once you're born, you can't be unborn. Then sanctification is your spiritual growth, and sanctification is kind of what you're dealing with over here at the bema seat. How did you grow spiritually? How mature did you become spiritually? What works did you do for God? And what was the motive behind those works? And the works are judged, but you personally are not. And so you can suffer loss. Everything that you did could go up in a pile of smoke because you had all the wrong motives behind what you were doing. You wanted to be famous. You wanted people to like you. You wanted to get money. You were trying to impress the girl next door. If it wasn't for the right motive, the pure motive of serving God, it's gone. And so people will suffer loss things that they thought that they were doing, they'd get rewards for it.
They're still
done.
saved.
Yeah, but they're still saved. If you're not saved, you're over here, under the law.
And it gets down to the heart of the matter.
Yes,
It's-
whether they actually asked Jesus to
As
save.
Judas, he was all of the above as far as works and all, but it was his heart. That's if he's not saved.
Well, I'm looking at Judas, and I have a different point of view because Judas came back and repented.
We had a discussion at our Bible study.
Right.
And we were saying that, only God knows, but
You
his
know
heart,
what,
he
right.
wanted to give that money back. And he was regretful and everything
He was
else.
coming in confessing and
I kind of
repenting.
think, yeah.
And the priest, in typical fashion, says, that's not our problem, you go take care of it. So I
See, and I've
think,
often thought that as well.
Yeah,
But only God
because-
knows, right?
yeah,
I think
only
because
God-
of him committing suicide is where people
and again,
said that,
suicide, and this is a Catholic teaching, and I really hate to keep picking on the Catholics, but they twist things to fit what they want to fit. They say suicide is a mortal sin. Well, the Bible does not describe mortal sins and non-mortal sins. Sin is sin. James says if you break one part of the law, you're guilty of all of it. So they made a distinction in sin, which they did not have the authority to do. And they say that, suicide is murder. And murder is a mortal sin, and since you killed yourself, you can't ask forgiveness. Keep in mind that when you asked Jesus to save you, that was one of those future sins that he died on the cross. Because on the cross, every sin he paid for was a future sin that we had not yet committed, nor had we confessed or repented of. But he paid for it back here on the cross. He had to atone for future sins, or he'd have to come back and die at the end of time to do that. And if you look in the scriptures, you find one, King Saul, he called up the spirit of Samuel with the witch of Endor. And for that, Samuel says, that's it, God's done with you. This time tomorrow, you're going to be here with me. And in battle, Saul threw himself on his sword and committed suicide rather than being captured. Where was Samuel? Samuel was in the bosom of Abraham. When Samson pulled down the temple, he committed suicide to kill all those Philistines. And he is mentioned in the hall of faith in Hebrews 11. Jesus, on the cross, if you pay careful attention, nobody killed him. When he says it is finished, every account in the gospel says he dismissed his spirit. That is a form of suicide. He killed himself. He separated his spirit from himself so he could die on the cross. So there is nothing in the Bible that teaches committing suicide is an unforgivable sin and you're going to be in hell. You just got to do your research.
It's only God who knows the heart.
It's only God who knows.
Right.
Yeah, we can suspect and stuff. And this is the funny thing that says that, by their fruits you shall know them. Well, all you know by the fruit is if they are producing or not. He can't tell you if they're a Christian or not. They can only say that this person is producing fruit that looks like God's fruit, or this person is not producing fruit. And again, if you can come before the Bema seat and suffer loss, but you yourself not be lost, it's possible to live your entire life without producing fruit that people would recognize. And again, it's the idea that it's not our faithfulness, it's God's faithfulness that saves us. And that's what we keep messing up. I love what Pastor Rex was saying this morning is that, it's not the person who's praying that's going to make the prayer come true. It's the person who's receiving the prayer that's going to make it come true. So we can mess up on our prayers like crazy and be terrible prayers, and God hears us, and God is the one that's going to do it. Same thing, we can mess up royally in our lives, and we can do a terrible job of being a Christian, but we're not trusting in our works to get us there. We're trusting in God. And that makes all the difference in the world when you start looking at it that way. Okay, do we have any more comments or observations?
This is might get off, but when you mentioned Hebrews, when you mentioned Hebrews Have you ever thought about why Adam and Eve's name's not there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that weren't there that you think, well, why aren't they here?
Yeah, but you would think the very first two people
Mhm.
would be there on the faith chapter.
What about Mary?
Well, Mary, yeah, I didn't even think of Mary. I thought of just, the first beginning of people.
Well, I'm
And
thinking Eve,
then all these other people are mentioned in, their faith.
but you don't have like Ezekiel's not in there, and I don't think Jeremiah was mentioned either. You know,
Yeah.
so there are people that are not there. Nehemiah wasn't mentioned there. He was picking very specific things for very specific reasons for the example he wanted to make.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is written to the Jews. So here's my Baswa. And to explain to the home audience, we read a Star Trek convention one time, and one of the writers came up and he was talking about the fact that the producers come in and directors come and say, I need a script that says this. And Star Trek is notorious for technobabble. They take something really elaborate and talk about some deep concept thing of quantum mechanics, and somebody says, so it's like you have a balloon full of air and you let go and it blows on. Yeah, that's it. They take something really complex, they make,
And make it.
and that's what they call the BS writer's answer. It's something you make up to explain
Oh.
something. So this is my BS writer's answer. This was written to the Jews, to the Hebrews. That's why he picks up with Abraham, the beginning of
There you
the
go.
Jews.
Yeah.
My best answer.
Yeah.
Caught me off guard there.
What do you think that part about Israel, where someone thinking they're talking about Jerusalem and Israel, that's not that replacement,
No,
Oh, okay.
there was no
Theology.
replacement theology.
but that's a big thing now in,
Yeah,
in
well,
the,
see, if you
the
don't-
religion world.
If you don't read your Bible in its entirety, you get confused.
Yeah.
People are arguing, is it pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib? It's pre-trib.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know? Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 and 25. Daniel's asking God, what is your plan for your people and for your city, Jerusalem, when we come back from Babylon? And Gabriel comes and says, this is the prophecy of the 70 weeks. 70 weeks have been assigned to the Jews and to Jerusalem to do the work that God has given you. And he has a list of the things they're supposed to do. And they've done all those except for, anoint the most holy. Well, from the signing of the decree to return home and rebuild the walls under Nehemiah to the coming of Messiah will be 69 weeks. And a week is a set of 7 years, and each year is a prophetic year, which is 360 days, not 365. And so from the day the decree was signed, we got that date. You follow out 173,880 days, 69 weeks. That is the Palm Sunday, the triumphant entry, when Jesus reveals himself. And on that day, they rejected him. And everything was put on hold. There was still 7 years that God has to come back and use the Jews. He is working through the church now. And that's kind of almost a replacement, but it's not a true replacement. God has set the Jews aside. He has not given up on them. And with the rapture, you see that Zechariah 12:10 says, they will look upon me whom they have pierced. They will mourn for him who, as they mourn for their only son. Their blindness will be lifted. They will see Jesus as the Messiah. And they will then become the instrument that God uses for 7 more years, 360 days per year during the tribulation. So yeah, that's the closest thing you can come to replacement.
Yeah, it's kind of like the church is replacing Israel. Israel is replacing the
God
church.
is using us now.
Yeah.
Because the message Israel was supposed to have was Jesus is the Messiah.
Mhm.
And when they rejected him, Psalm 69, Daniel's curse for God to give them spiritual blindness was activated. And Jesus even said, if you had seen in this your day, but now they shall be hidden from you. He activated the spiritual blindness. Deuteronomy, I think it's 32:22 was activated, and God says, I will make them jealous of a people who are not a people, and I will use a people who are not a people to make them jealous, and that's the church. All that took place with that one day when they rejected him. Okay, well, a little bit over, but anybody have any more questions or anything else?
I just wanted to, speaking of the red heifer, doesn't Israel have like about 3 of them right now that they're waiting to see?
They have probably more than 3. They've been getting born off and on.
Yeah.
I've seen it like 2 or 3 times they make a big announcement. The Temple Mount Faithful's website, Temple Institute, they keep track of that.
Yeah,
And again, like Amir said, they will not look at any of them yet. Because the minute they certify one as valid for sacrifice, they're going to have to take back the Temple Mount to rebuild the temple. And that's another whole story, because now the studies are showing that Temple Mount may not be where the original site of the temple was. We find that during the Dark Ages, some Jewish rabbi came to Israel and they're having a whole bunch of fits about it, and he says, okay guys, he's up on the Temple Mount, here, this is where the temple was. And they go, okay. And they all agreed on it. Nobody did any study. Nobody did any excavations. And now we're finding there's archaeological evidence of a temple or a sacrificial system taking place in Zion about 300 yards down the hill. So,
Don't they think that the temple is where Isaac was sacrificed?
you have what's called the Dome of the Rock.
Oh,
I was there. Back in '78, we were allowed to attend, and it was a Muslim site, so you had to take your shoes off. And I was, thought I was being really smart. I didn't want to have a pickpocket, take all my money, so I taken all my cash and I rolled my socks down and I stuck it up inside my socks and had my boots on. And get to the temple, we're going into the Dome of the Rock, take your shoes off. And I'm pulling my shoes off, and there's this money everywhere. And I'm trying to shove it in my pockets before people see it. And there was a giant rock about 2 or 3 stories down, and they say this is the rock where Abraham offered Isaac, but the Islamic people insist it was Ishmael that was offered. And very strictly, my wife caused an international incident. She separated from us and ended up in one of the other groups. We had Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and Riverside together, and there's like 17 buses. And she got
Did she do that on purpose?
No.
Because
She got in
some
the
of
wrong-
the things you've told about her, yeah.
Yeah, she got in the wrong group, and we're outside looking, and we can't find her. And everybody's first thought is, oh, she's being kidnapped, taken away. So her brother goes storming in to find her. He finds her, and he grabs her by the hand. And you cannot have intersexual touching.
Oh.
Men cannot touch female. He grabbed her by the hand, and he was pulling her out. And every guard there was screaming and yelling, no touching, no touching. And they were having fits and going crazy. And he got her outside. It's like, wow, gee, there's another international incident we can put down on our itinerary.
News at 11, yeah. Oh, no.
Okay, is there anything else? All right, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to come back and to reteach this lesson. I hope that we've covered the things that you want us to cover, and that we can even now find more information and better understanding from what you have in this symbol of the cities of refuge and the role of Jesus as the kinsman redeemer and as the avenger of blood. Now just lead us and guide us in all things, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.